Dear audience, please put your hands together to welcome our esteemed guest, Dr. Venka Purushothaman.
Good afternoon to one and all present here. I'm Deekshita Ganapati Raman.
And I'm Jayashita Mahota.
And we are beyond thrilled to be your hosts for today's leadership lecture series with an academic, award-winning art writer and arts and cultural leader, Dr. Venka Purushothaman. Before we begin, let's watch a video to commemorate the remarkable milestone of our Global Schools Foundation having completed 20 years since its inception.
What does it take to make a leader of tomorrow? A leader is forged by fire, shaped, reshaped, their metal tested, resilience and strength carefully owned. Yet a leader must also be like water, filling the cracks in a world rich in diversity, attuned to its complexities, flowing, adapting, changing. For a leader of tomorrow sails along on the winds of change, their minds purified by the rarefied air of lofty thoughts and high ideals, the jet streams of innovation and invention, neither of which can be enabled without space. Space that can both contain and expand, mold and liberate. A foundation. For a leader must stand on solid ground. Responsibility breeds sustainability. Wisdom is cultivated by respect for this earth. Building the foundations for tomorrow's leaders begins here. Global Schools Foundation, celebrating 20 years of premium education.
What a truly inspiring video. Dr. Venka Purushothaman has had a distinguished career in higher education, in the arts, as well as the cultural and creative sectors. He has overseen substantial development in Lasalle College of the Arts as a leader in academia and education. He is in charge of overseeing the creation of industry-sensitive and a student-centered curriculum and raising the college's profile in the worlds of art higher education. He is also in charge of the quality of practice-led art education.
In order to support cultural leadership and research in Southeast Asia, he also launched the Asia-Pacific Network for Culture, Education, and Research, and oversaw the creation of a number of groundbreaking programs. He is a founding member of the Global Design Initiative faculty, a collaboration of 5 universities from around the world that examines cross-cultural design pedagogies and practices.
Dr. Purushothaman continues to give lectures across the globe on the evolving role of higher education in the arts, in the creative economy, and works to offer voice to a new generation. Dr. Venka, with his extremely diverse portfolio, is currently a government, academic, and professional committee expert who has presided over significant panels on youth development, arts funding, and cultural awards.
We would like to invite our esteemed guest, Dr. Purushothaman, on stage for a panel discussion with students from our campus here in Singapore to know more about his experiences and challenges he has faced throughout his life. Sir, please.
Good afternoon, sir. We are greatly looking forward to this discussion with you. Before we begin, would you like to share some of the impactful moments of your life with us?
I'm really, excited to be here. I'd like to thank Chairman Atul and Principal Melissa for hosting me and inviting me to to really be in this dialogue with all of you. So feel free to ask any question of my area of interest. I always consider myself an accidental academic, someone who was always interested in my first love, which is reading. And I read a lot. And that was my starting point in my own journey. And I read everything that I could touch upon. I used to read about 10 books a week, right? And then I started to read people. I decided to read cultures and practices. And my travel journey around the world kind of led me to continuously read. And that reading also introduced me to many ways of looking at how cultures intersect with each other and how do we create value from intersecting cultures and learning from them. And I found that the arts was a very good manifestation of expressing those intersections between cultures. And that's how I kind of came into the arts. And spending a lot of time, really traveling the world, seeing the world, and bringing my own understanding or nuanced understanding of how cultures work and how cultures out of different contexts function in what I call in situ, in a situated location, and how they create meaning for their societies. So for me, that was fundamentally a key driver of learning and being inquisitive. I consider myself a student, a lifelong student. I'm still a student. I'm going to be here to learn as much from you as much as I can share with you. So that's an important life philosophy that I have. And clearly, when I came into the arts, I was primarily not looking at coming into education, even though I was very much interested in education through my undergraduate, master's work and my PhD work. But really, when I stumbled into the arts, I discovered an abundance of imagination and creativity and unabashed fearlessness to go and discover things. And this is something I found the artists as a community very fascinating, because they are not actually looking to set the world straight. They're looking to set themselves straight. And in that journey, they discover and they ask difficult questions and stumble upon it. And through their curiosity, through their lens, I found that I was learning much more about myself. So that is the journey I came into. And I found that coming into the public sector, and I was part of the team that built the Esplanade, Theatres on the Bay, that you might see. And I take pride in recommending the name, the Esplanade, for them, right? And really working through with government, exploring models of how the arts can manifest itself and contributing to what, in Singapore, how the arts can contribute to GDP growth. And these were very, very important dimensions that brought me into it. And the final piece of the jigsaw is the fact that I felt that while there were a lot of infrastructure development happening, it needed to connect with education and what I call talent pipelining. Not just artists, but administrators, professionals who would continue to build the arts, not only just art for art's sake, but in a nuanced ecology that can be celebrated globally, that gives you the agility to work in all sectors beyond the arts. And so that excited me a lot, and that's the journey I'm currently in.
Thank you, sir. That was very enlightening. So with your permission, I would like to begin with today's discussion. My first question for you is, you've been involved in a multitude of projects, ranging from being the author of a bestseller book and also transforming Lasalle to what it is today. So how have these experiences changed you as a person, and how can we as students get involved in various activities in our school life as well as our future careers?
So I think it's an important question. So in terms of my profile, and if you Google it or looked at YouTube, it might seem multifarious, but in actual fact, at the heart of it, I'm a big believer in storytelling and understanding how stories can actually create the kinds of results that we want to see. So a common thread in all the things that I do is the kind of stories that I want to tell and the kinds of stories that I want to learn from. So that's a very important thing. So when you engage in a multitude of things, you must be driven by a core passion. What is your core passion? Yes, you might do sports. Yes, you might do the arts. Yes, you might do the sciences. But underlying all of that, as young people, as an individual, we are continuously in search of that common landing passion. And it takes time. It's not something that you wake up magically and say, I know what I'm interested in. Yes, you're interested in, but then as an individual, as a human being, you need to find the core engine that anchors you. And this anchoring is important. You know, we all have to anchor ourselves in some form. Sports anchors us in some way, science, arts, all anchors us in different ways. But as a human, we will always find where our place is in society. So for that, that journey anchors me in the projects I undertake with a deep sense of curiosity. So the deep sense of curiosity is when you do a project, you must learn as much about yourself as you learn about the project. When you learn about yourself, you are able to contribute effectively to shaping a project. And that, for me, I think is the mark of how all the different projects came into alignment. I didn't seek to write an award-winning book, but the passion anchored it and drove it, and it started to draw interest from different people. And perhaps if I can share the book that I wrote about was The Art of Sukumar Bose, you know, reflections on Southeast and South Asia. And it was very interesting because it is a book that was not even written in India. And even though the artist was the curator of paintings as the Rashtrapati Bhavan, right, and he was appointed by the Mountbattens and continued in a post-independent India, and also came to Singapore in the 70s, and yet he was never documented. He was only mentioned in a sentence in art history. And for me, that curiosity brought me into Shantiniketan, going into the Lucknow Art School. It took me through many journeys, and because I was extremely curious, how can history, and India, which is known for documenting histories so well, leave out a seminal personality? So for me, that was the starting point, the curiosity and the ability to tell stories about what you discover, and that's important.
Thank you, sir.
Hi, sir. For the next question, speaking of enriching life experiences, sir, you have traveled all over the world to achieve the qualifications you have right now. Could you share with us how the difference in cultures impacted the art in those communities?
Yeah, that's a great question. First of all, you know, I didn't start by seeking the qualification. I went seeking knowledge. And the knowledge often was anchored with a qualification and the process. So when I was undertaking a PhD, it was a meditation for me as much as what it is in the outcome. The outcome is great, all that is fantastic. But it's a meditation, and you become a deep expert in a field, and you must be able to embody that as to what it means to you, because it is not for the faint-hearted to want to do a PhD. All right. You first of all have to become a global expert about everything about the discipline, understand languages and study things in order to do that. So it is a tough meditation of its sort, but you go through that journey. But what you learn is you discover about yourself, and you discover, and in my travels, I discovered that, you know, every community finds its own voice through the arts, and every community finds ways to express itself through the arts. And they mean many different things. So for example, the Indian diaspora in Singapore or in London or in Canada or in Melbourne are very, very distinctive in terms of their sense of self-expression. We might just look at the Indian diaspora as one composite. We might look at the Chinese diaspora as one composite, but it's not. If you talk to Chinese who were born and bred in Finland, or talking to Chinese communities in Buenos Aires, you discover that they are so much more nuanced and internalized, and they're building their own cultural forms. So one of the beautiful things about culture is the fact that it is never static and is very, very multifarious. But unfortunately, we live in a world that we have very little patience to explore these cultures. And because we have very little patience to explore cultures, that's why tensions start. And that's how wars start, because we have very little patience to understand cultures. So it's very important to look at how the arts necessarily ignites a particular way of thinking, right? So I use the example of the Indian diaspora. So for example, in Singapore, you've got two manifestations of it. For those who came, pre-independence and those who came post-independence. And they all come from different dimensions and sensibilities. So those cultural nuances need to be understood and appreciated in its different forms. But we have very little patience in understanding that. So if you go to London today and you talk to the South Asian community, it is a very, very different, nuanced way. And it emerges in the artwork, like for example, whether you see the dance works of Shobhana Jayasingh or Akram Khan, they all demonstrate a very nuanced British sensibility, right? But it also poses some fundamental questions. Will Salman Rushdie ever become part of the British canon of English literature? Right? So these are important questions that they have to necessarily ask. Or a Rohinton mystery, will he become the part of the canon of Canadian literature? So how do you start to negotiate those relationships? And one of the challenges of society is we have very little patience to understand cultures. And the arts is one way of simplifying and opening up the space for that conversation.
Thank you, sir.
Hi, sir. As you have mentioned previously, exploration of culture plays a crucial role in the creation of art. However, even today, in many communities, people do not see degrees in arts and humanities as qualifying or applicable in real-world situations. How would you convince such parties otherwise?
I think that's the challenge of the lifelong educator, right? Because I think this is an important lesson. First of all, the humanities and the arts are all pervasive in society. It's all around you. We have all come through COVID, all right? In many forms, we have developed new rituals. Do we know what our new rituals are? All right, we have all, okay, here is an example of a new ritual. We all are wearing, some of you are wearing masks. All right, that's a new ritual. That's a new social ritual we've introduced ourselves. We have all learned about hand washing and sanitizing. It's a new ritual. We have started to talk about social distancing. And if whether you take the public transport or whether you take a bus, how you sit and organize yourself, we have decided what personal space is all about. So there has been a redefinition of our, what I call socius, our space. So when our socius itself is being redefined, how do you imagine the value of the humanities helping us explain that? Because it's the humanities that created the socius. Science might have said you need to socially distance, but what is the natural impact of all of these? I'll give you an example. There's a lot of studies about the impact of COVID and mask wearing on young children. So children between the ages of 3 to 6 necessarily need to learn languages and learn to speak by emulation. They listen and they learn, but they also look at your lip movement. That's the way children learn. They look at emulation. And COVID and mask wearing actually impacted learning for young children because they are not seeing how your formulation of your mouth actually structures words and structures and systems and all that. So you're going to get a generation of students who might speak funny, all right, in their articulation and all of that. And here, this is where the humanities, you know, and when I say, I use the word humanities in the broadest sense, the fact that, you know, it includes sociology, political science, social sciences, and all of that, psychology, it is actually helping us make sense and bring communities together. It becomes the glue that the science doesn't fill. I'll give you another good example of COVID. The scientists are brilliant in coming up with vaccines, but they're really, really dreadful in naming the COVID numbers. You know, they've got all these funny numbers, B1.2, 0.5. You know, we've got all these numbers, and science is one of the worst communicators of the world. They do intuitively a lot of research, but they are the worst communicators. So you need the humanities to communicate to people, all right? Humanities is the one that communicates to people. And I use this basic example, and and this is something, a philosophy I really do believe in very, very clearly. There's a philosopher called Northrop Frye, and he's a Canadian philosopher, and he wrote this wonderful, small book called The Educated Imagination. And in that book, he actually talks about, you know, if you're stranded on an island, what kind of world do you want to live in? And I paraphrase here, he says, you know, the arts and the humanities helps you imagine the kind of life that you want to live in. The science helps you achieve it. So if you are imagining the kind of life you want, it will be in the clouds, but the science and the engineering and the technology is going to get you closer to achieving it. So they cannot be without one or the other. And that's a reality that we live in. But unfortunately, we live in a highly bifurcated world where people think the STEM subject works and all of that, and this part is not. And we need to get ourselves out of the mindset, because all sectors can be monetized effectively and successfully, including the arts. And that's very, very important to always think about it. And of course, your generation, many of you are, Gen Zs and Alpha generation, right? And many of you are, how many of you are on TikTok here? See, that's quite a lot. How many of the faculty are on TikTok here? You see, and that's the difference, correct? 95% of you are on TikTok. How many of you are on Instagram? Oh, wow, okay. How many of you are on Facebook? Okay, those of you on Facebook are mostly keeping in touch with your parents, correct? Right, and how, okay, so there are many of these WhatsApp messengers. All right, so clearly, there's a huge new communication dimension that, even we as academics have to study how this is going to change the transference of knowledge, the management of knowledge, and the new rituals that we develop. So the argument of it is, if you want to live and breathe, you need the humanities. If you want to be able to realize how the breathing is going to take place, you need the science. You can't do without one or the other. All right?
Thank you, sir.
Hi, sir. As you said, you believe that advancement and change is crucial in the progression of art. So, however, many visual artists today have been exploited by the creators of AI art platforms, with their style and artwork being used to build algorithms without any kind of accreditation. So how do you suggest that we move forward in the harmonization of art and technology while maintaining the integrity of art and their artists?
Yeah, and this, I think, first of all, it needs to come with respect. I think one of the things that people do assume in the arts is everyone can be an artist. Unfortunately, not everyone who deals with a creative activity is an artist. There's a fundamental truth about it. And artists primarily are hugely resilient and resourceful in their own right. And they will deal with technologies, they will deal with different forms because these forms are methods or materials to their worldview. All right, they will go through that. But clearly, the ecosystem sometimes does capitalize on that, right? And it capitalizes on encouraging artists to produce things in a much more, democratic, much more manufacturing modality of producing numerous things. And here, some artists lend themselves to it. Some of them are hugely successful because much of it is tied to, survival and whatnot. But much of them are also rejecting it. Many artists are rejecting it and saying that, no, I do not want to become another NFT. All right, and I'm sure you all are familiar with NFTs. All right, and there's so much horrible art in there. It's absolutely shocking. It's absolutely shocking. And please don't go and buy or invest your Bitcoins into that stuff. All right, get yourself some knowledge of what you're looking at. All right, because a lot of, and this is one of my holiday exercises I'm planning to do. I've got quite a lot of photographs on my iPhone. I'm going to market one of these pictures and see how it gains traction. All right, and that's what's happening. So yes, Madonna's putting something up there. People are putting things up there, but it's not necessarily good art. And so we have to continue to have many more informed individuals like yourself who are going to be able to say, I need to respect the integrity of what the art is doing and how the technology itself, can enable it. But then at the same time, there are artists who are doing phenomenal work with AI. And here, and I spent some very interesting time in the Harvard School of Biological Engineering, where in that School of Engineering, where they're doing some absolutely path-breaking research in cancer and all of that, amidst their midst, they've got artists. All right, because the artists are helping them think creatively, problem solve differently, and think in awkward ways that science does not think. Because science thinking is very sequential, all right, and consequential, all right? You do this, you test this, you do this, you flow, the sequencing flow is quite normalized in many ways. Artists are the furthest from sequential thinking, all right? They proliferate in ways path less traveled. And because of that, in Harvard, they find that really exciting, that the artists and philosophers are helping them rethink those dimensions. And that's where the uniqueness is emerging. So we need to find a way of building respect, and your generation will be, pioneers in providing that fact that there are going to be specialists in all the fields, just like the way you need to also respect sportsmen. And, you need to be able to find their place and provide them the ecosystem to exist, coexist.
Thank you, sir.
Sir, we often see students and peers who are interested in different forms of art. So do you feel that fluency in one form of art translates to another?
Yes and no, depending on how the discipline itself lends itself. For example, first of all, if you're getting into the arts, you need to understand the technical dimensions of the art. And that's the part. So yes, if you're learning dance, you need to get the technique right? You need to be anchored in a discipline. And that goes without saying. In all fields, you need an anchoring discipline. What is the anchoring discipline? And you build a confidence and a language within that. It is just not learning about technique. It's easy to acquire technique. You can spend 20 years learning technique, but you will not be able to bring reflection and analysis and anything beyond that. So an artist goes beyond the technique and brings it to another level where the technique, the conversations and the issues around the art anchored on this technique is able to have conversations with other disciplines. And that it has to happen in that level. So when we use the word interdisciplinary in the arts, we look at interdisciplinary in the arts not in terms of bringing one art form and putting together with another. That's called fusion. That's not interdisciplinary. For us in the arts, interdisciplinarity is the training of the mind, it's the muscularity of the mind that needs to be reshaped by bringing two disciplines together or three disciplines together. And interdisciplinarity for us is not an outcome, it's a means to an end. All right? Interdisciplinarity is a practice in the arts that you're working along, and sometimes it's very interesting because you might be a musician or a jazz musician, you could be an animator, you could be, AI-centric theater maker, and you are having this interdisciplinary conversation, but interestingly, it's the technical people who try to make sense of what you're doing because you're continuously working through your languages to build something new. And an interdisciplinary outcome will ultimately produce new knowledge, a new form, and it births new forms. And I think that's important. And a key word in interdisciplinarity is syncretism. So when you see things blend, you do not know where it actually falls. It looks a bit like dance, or is that music? Is that animation? You are unable, it blurs the lines. And that syncretism is very, very distinctive from fusion. The world is filled with lots of fusion. But syncretism is also a scientific term, but it's very much embedded in the arts.
Thank you, sir.
So moving on to your next question. As is clear, Lasalle is a highly acclaimed college with students from around the world coming to study art from some of the best professors in their respective fields. What is the best part of working and interacting with the leading cultural and artistic leaders of today and tomorrow?
Yeah, I think I find myself very privileged to work in an art school environment. First of all, because for us, academic freedom and creative freedom is paramount. And our classrooms at the tertiary level are not only just classrooms, but they're actually safe spaces to ask difficult questions. So the professors and the students are asking really fundamentally difficult questions about life, about society, about artistic practice, tearing things apart, fighting at each other, but it's all done in a safe space of a classroom. The moment you go outside, the requirements are very, very different. So we always ensure that the safe space is important for us to learn. And this is where we find that in the arts, there's a lot more liberatedness about learning about what are the new avenues for education, for arts education. So this is something I've been involved in quite extensively with quite a lot of universities globally, in really looking about what is the future of the curriculum. How do you teach moving forward, especially when you have a lot of information on the internet. Right? Today, I can learn how to play the piano by just going on YouTube. I don't need a teacher in front of me. And you've got a lot of people who are very good at it. People are learning languages by emulation on the internet. So people are learning through these processes. So education for us has to shift. So this is something that we are actually exploring, and we have developed a consortium of universities called Shared Campus, and I chair the consortium of universities, and we are looking at what is the 21st century paradigm for arts education, and how will it shape the future. And a lot of it is interdisciplinary work. And we work in global settings for students from around the world to come and mingle. And you also will find in this kind of learning environments, many of them don't speak the same language. They speak multiple languages. They work with multiple disciplines. But they have a common research question that kind of brings them together, and from there they learn. So we have found that this kind of bringing people together in very, very odd cultural settings and putting them in the classroom has become a very, very unique teaching methodology. And hence we really believe in that internationalization of a classroom, because it brings perspectives. It's very interesting. How many of you know your own classmate and where they come from, which part of India or Singapore they come from, and how much do you know about them? And that inquiry is an important part of this kind of learning. So one of the futures of educational development we are looking at is how do you create these kinds of interdisciplinary learning environments where people can come together with a research question. So there are two things that we are exploring, one of which is climate change, and how do artists deal with climate change. Artists deal with climate change quite extensively, but when you talk about climate change and scientists always use art as visualization. They only use it as embellishment, but they don't look at the point of inquiry. So we are developing, and actually I'm currently developing a new program, a master's program in arts and ecology, to actually put the arts as the center DNA to question the ecological concerns of the world. So we are currently working with a couple of colleagues and environmentalists from Harvard and London to really start to imagine how the arts can actually function effectively in this agenda setting for climate change. So this is an important way of turning and flipping the question, because this question of arts and ecology, if you go to the United States, I'm not sure about Asia, but particularly in the United States, you find that quite extensively many of these concerns are addressed by the environmental studies, forestry departments. They are all located within those kinds of disciplines, but they're never quite in the humanities. The humanities have primarily been documenters of climate change, or the Anthropocene, as many of you might be familiar with. But we want to move away from we are not mere bystanders, but we want to be central to asking and addressing the question. And how can the arts do? And that's one of the beautiful things about being in an arts environment, because we have the freedom to play, which moves away from the exactitudes of the sciences. But at the same time, we have wonderful conversations with the sciences, because many of the fields that we deal with needs that scientific knowledge to come in to inform and ensure that there is, appropriate qualitative and quantitative measure of impact.
Thank you, sir.
Following up, not every artist is recognized as Da Vinci or Picasso. Some may become the Van Gogh of their time. How does one deal with this kind of fate?
Yeah, I think that, just like, there is only one A.R. Rahman, there are millions who have been missed out. And this is one of the problems of society, because we are always in some form pinnacleizing people, right? And much of, I wouldn't say 18th or 17th century, but much of 19th century and 20th century has been about pinnacleizing individuals to a level, to a point that it moves away from the battalion of people who are doing phenomenal work and being missed out. And so for that one Da Vinci, there are millions of Da Vincis who are missed out. You know, for the one Van Gogh, there are millions that are missed out. And even, you know, if you go to a Van Gogh exhibition, Van Gogh also has good days and bad days. And you see some really good Van Gogh and really bad Van Gogh, right? But if you are able to understand it, and listening to A.R. Rahman music, there are good music and they're really, you know, not so good. So that's an artist's journey as individuals, because it's human endeavor. The human endeavor, the human being is a constant work in progress. It's not a perfect being. And that's the beauty of all of us. We are not perfect, that we are continuously in the making. And because we are in the making, we have the good days and we are having the not so good days. And therein we own it, right? But we need to change society's perception that we need to look for the Van Goghs. Because it shape-shifts completely the world. Because in your generation, there are many, many Van Goghs. Because if I go online today, many of the individuals, whether they're artists or social commentators, they are very much self-branding themselves online. And where do you find? Do you look for the top Van Goghs by number of influencers, number of followers? How do you determine success? Right? The struggles of Da Vinci and Van Gogh are well documented, hugely well documented. But we have romanticized their journeys in many ways. And we need to think about, do we romanticize or do we move away from embracing that everyone is creative? All of us are creative. There's no such thing as only artists are creative. Every single one of us are creative. But what will unlock our creativity? That's the most important thing. Education helps you find that way to unlock your creativity, and you are being put on a journey that will help you excel in the field of your choice. Like for scientists, the big challenge is everyone wants to be a Nobel laureate, but there are only so many places that you've got there. But then the millions who are being forgotten, who are making truly impactful work, that's significant. Right? So I think it's important that as society, as a community, we also need to have a paradigmatic shift in the way we see and express what success is. Because success in everyday life, it becomes meaningful or meaningless in the very thing that we do.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. We're just nearing the end of our conversation. However, we have one more question for you. You are known to be passionate about encouraging the future generation to be change makers, problem solvers, and value creators. Could you share some words of advice as to how we students can participate and grow our skills to become global citizens?
Yeah, I think, you know, first of all, I need to learn a lot from all of you. Some of you could be sitting there utterly bored with this conversation. Some of you could be utterly inspired by it, but it's again a spectrum, correct? Within that spectrum of what I've said anchors you there. It's about finding that space and finding that connection. But each and every one of you must be able to be curious about the world. First of all, curiosity is not just the number of zeros in the Google, right? It is about expanding wide open, and the fact that every day is a learning opportunity. And you are learning something new from the person sitting next to you. You're finding something new from each and every one that you're connecting with on the internet. So it's very, very important that you're very, very passionate about learning. And of course, today we use words like lifelong learning and all of that. But lifelong learning is something as humans we have to do anyway. We have to learn new skills. And I have to learn how to use the smartphones. We have to learn how to use the computers. We have to learn continuously. So each generation will have to address its issues of its time through learning and through curiosity. But do spend time to also be compassionate about people who are not up to speed with you. Because you don't exist in a vacuum. You exist in a community. You can be an isolated individual in your own room with your own computer, and I play my games, my latest Nintendos and all of that. I can do whatever I want. But at the end of the day, you still coexist as a human in a community. And our responsibility as every individual is to bring the community along. I can have the best education, but if the rest of the community doesn't understand what that means, it means nothing. So it must be of use to the community at large, because that's what you're excelling in driving. So while the personal challenge is there, it's very, very important to ultimately see how that personal achievements contribute to the larger society. I want to paraphrase another one statement that I found quite interesting in coming out of a movie many years ago. It was called 7 Years in Tibet, right? And I'm going to paraphrase this again. It was starring Brad Pitt as a German Olympian. Do you all know Brad Pitt? Yeah, right? He's like a German Olympian, and he's going to climb the Himalayas. All right, so he's out there, he's going there, and he meets this tailor, tailor, and she explains to her, look, I've won all these medals, and shows all the credentials, and he said, I want to go and conquer the Himalayas. And she makes, and I'm paraphrasing this, and in a few words. She says, like, oh, it's interesting that, you're climbing the Mount Everest to boost your ego, but we climb Mount Everest to conquer our ego. And therein lies the dichotomy of how education really influences us. We learn because it makes us human. We learn because we are able to bring our communities together and bring them along. And that's what the arts and humanities do, because it always reminds us that we still are contributing to the human discussion and the furthering of the human. The problems that we have created for ourselves has to be resolved by ourselves. And we as a community must come together, and your generation will be able to address many of these questions and concerns very, very directly and very heads-on. Of course, my generation might have messed up quite a lot of things for you, all right? But it's also your chance not to mess it up for your future generations, all right? So many of you might support Greta Thunberg, but many of you would also support Kylie Jenner, all right? So you've got the two sides of the coin, correct? One is about consumerism, the other one is about saving the world. So where is your balance? And this is the spectrum within which we all live in, and we all need to come together, and you will find your own voice in this space. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. That was the final question for today afternoon, but thank you for this extremely enriching discussion. I'm sure it was very enlightening for not just us panelists, but for the entire audience, regardless of whether they want to pursue arts or not. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And, I really, continue with your journey and don't be shy. And thanks for the great questions. I think you're prepared very well, and it hope was not too nerve-wracking for all of you. Right? I think we must just enjoy this moment. And thank you all for having me, and I wish you all the best.
That was a wonderful discussion, and I'm sure that all of us have learned a lot from Dr. Purushothaman's valuable academic experiences. On this note, sir, may I request you to remain on stage and sign our guest book?
Thank you, sir, for taking time off your busy schedule to be here with us today. Now I would like to request our principal, Ms. Melissa Maria, to felicitate Dr. Purushothaman and present him with a token of our appreciation. Ma'am, please.
We would also like to take this opportunity to thank the panelists as well as the audience for being here with us today.